Welcome, everyone, and happy National Stalking Awareness Month. I am Jennifer Landhuis, and I am the director of the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center. And I am honored today to be joined by 5 powerful, fierce, amazing individuals who are going to share a little bit about their stories or the stories of their loved ones. And just so you all know, if you're not familiar with SPARC, we are funded by the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women to do training and technical assistance specific to the issue of stalking. And Stalking Awareness Month is part of the many things that we get to help all of you across the country celebrate and highlight in the work that you do. If you haven't checked out our website, you can go to stalkingawareness.org. This particular webinar will be recorded and we will have it available on our website as soon as we get the captioning back, which is usually about 1 to 2 weeks after this particular webinar. So you can feel free to check out the recorded version on our website following the posting of that particular. So what we want to start off with today is just briefly talking about the definition of stalking, just so that we're all on the same page as our survivors introduce themselves and tell you a little about their situations. So the definition that we're all going to use today is that stalking is a pattern of behavior that's directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to either fear for their safety or the safety of someone else. As I mentioned earlier, I have the honor and privilege of introducing our 5 panelists for today: Debbie Riddle, Anna Nassett, Lenora Claire, Caitlin Mathis, and Aziza Murphy. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their situation and what's currently happening in their situation, so that you all get a really great background about what we're going to be discussing further today. So Debbie, I'd love to start with you, if you would start us off.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. I'm born and raised Ohio girl, recently relocated to North Carolina. I am here actually on behalf of my sister. My sister was relentlessly stalked by an ex-partner for a full year in 2002. In January of 2003, he found her and murdered her out in California. Shortly after her murder, I knew I wanted to do something with Peggy's story. I didn't want her death to be in vain. I always wondered how many people, how many women were out there like Peggy, how many cases were out there like Peggy, how many families like ours were suffering. So I turned my pain into passion, into telling Peggy's story. I connected with the Stalking Resource Center and the National Center for Victims of Crime in July of 2003, traveled to Washington, D.C., where we asked Congress to recognize January as National Stalking Awareness Month. So here we are, 20 years later, celebrating Peggy, celebrating survivors, and I'm absolutely honored to sit on this panel this afternoon with these amazing women. So thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Nassett. Great to be joining everyone here today. I, like Debbie, am also originally an Ohio girl, but currently live in Vermont. From about 2008 until now, I've been stalked by a man I don't know. I found out about it in 2011. I was living in Washington State, where I owned an art gallery, and he began stalking me through that. Over the course of many years, he would serve a 1-year jail sentence. When he got out, his stalking continued, and I would end up closing my business and eventually relocating here to Vermont, to where I live now, to try and escape that, but that did not work. And he continued to stalk me. And in 2019, we went to trial in Washington State, where he was found guilty of felony aggravated stalking and felony cyber stalking, and is currently serving a 10-year sentence in Washington State, which at the time was one of the largest in the country, or the longest in the country, and really pushed me to say, I can't be the exception. This needs to be more of the standard. So going out and speaking and training law enforcement and prosecutors and advocates and I just wrote my first book of my whole story called Now I Speak, which came out last year, and am just so honored to be here. And in fact, the day that we got that guilty verdict and that 10-year sentence, the very, very first person I texted was Debbie Riddle, because we are all here because of her. And so I'm so grateful to be on this panel with her today.
Thanks, Anna. Aziza?
Hello. Hi, everyone. I feel like I'm the crier of the group, so I'm going to try to get through this without crying. My name is Aziza Murphy. I live in Baltimore. I'm a mother of 2 small boys. I started getting stalked back in 2020. And I started getting stalked by someone I dated for about 4 months. He started stalking me after we broke up. It's been a journey since then. He broke into my house. He started stalking and harassing my mother, my father, my siblings. He ended up getting me fired from my job. I think not getting support, the support that I felt like I needed at the time, I reached out to public support. I reached out to social media and I posted about it, and everything went viral. More viral than I ever expected. I never expected to be an advocate. I never expected to be in this situation at all. But everything turned for me and my family. He ended up getting arrested in December of 2020 after pleading and begging for my case. He ended up getting sentenced to about 6 months for breaking into my house, and he ended up getting sentenced to 18 months for harassment charges, and he only served about 8 of those. So now he's out. Now I am trying to navigate and figure out how to help other people. I don't think that I should have had to plead the way that I did, and I just wanted to support other women and see how we can get something done.
Thanks, Aziza. Lenora?
Hi, everyone. I just want to start by saying how meaningful it is to share this space with you and how appreciative I am to be here and appreciative to be alive. I'm just going to name that. Again, my name is Lenora Claire. This is my puppy Hollywood. She deserves a little recognition too. I am a multi-violent crime survivor because for many of us, that's our reality. There's multi-violent crimes. I've been stalked since 2011. I am an advocate and activist like everybody here. I am a founding member of the Los Angeles District Attorney Crime Victims Advisory Board, where I advise for gender-based violence for the city of LA. I do things like restraining orders for people, court support. That side of advocacy was so important for me because I really received no assistance when my stalking situation started, and I really wanted to be for people what I didn't have available to me. I have a media company, Lenora Claire Consulting, where I work with survivors in the media, because when I tried to get help, when I tried to tell my story in the media, which I was incredibly fortunate to have such a huge platform, a lot of harm was done to me, and that's something we don't talk about when survivors try to utilize the media. And what happened to me was a very large crime show. They interviewed my stalker without my consent, which ultimately is what I believe triggered him to attempt to kidnap me. And while we get to that portion of the story, so I've been stalked, as I mentioned, since 2011. And I always laugh with Anna. I was also an art curator and I got my stalker that way. And we're not like a cautionary tale for parents trying to tell their children, don't go into the
Lenora?
art. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the ASL interpreters are asking if you would slow down just a little
Oh,
bit.
sure.
No, that's okay. Thank
I'm
you
trying
so
to
much.
micro machine it. So there's so much, and I want to respect everyone's time. We live in this culture right now where we tell people, go out, put yourself out there. And that's all I was doing. I had a gallery and it was successful. And I was in a newspaper, and a man who I didn't know saw me, and that's what ultimately began. And it's been a horrific journey. I put my stalker in jail 6 times. I was able to receive a felony stalking sentence, which here in California, it's 4 years, but because of Prop 57, which considers stalking to be a nonviolent offense, it was ultimately reduced in half to serving 2. And after serving the 2 years, within 3 days, he was offending, he was stalking me again. And that's the reality for a lot of us with these crimes. And so this is why I do this work. I do this work because I know the cost. I had to give up my career. I had to give up my gallery because I couldn't have, same with Anna, we couldn't have public facing jobs. And it's just important to me to communicate how deeply this affects you, from your personal life, your health. That's something we don't talk about. your finances, just the overall impact. Again, I'm just grateful to be here and to contribute and hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you so much, Lenora. And I hope all 5 of you, before we get to Caitlin, are taking a look at the chat and seeing all the love and thankfulness that everyone that's listening is expressing to you. So Caitlin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day today. So I'm here as a past victim of stalking, but my stalker was an ex-boyfriend. So I met him when I was 18 and quickly I just fell for him. But 2 months into the relationship, I saw that there were characteristics that I didn't like to see, and it just pointed towards him not being a good person, and things did escalate. I tried to get out of the relationship before I moved off for school, but then he showed up to my mom's house and I just stuck with the relationship. But then I moved off for school the following week, which allowed me to have that security because I knew he didn't know where I lived. He didn't know where my dorm room was. And I moved in and I ended things with him. I was planning that this was the last time I would see him. But then that's when he started stalking me and he didn't want to let me go pretty much. And my stalker he was charged with a criminal trespass order. He just kept racking up charges. And then it escalated to the point where he met a girl at the bars where I went to school and he took her home and murdered her. My story is to say the kind of behavior that a stalker can have can really escalate and pretty quickly too, because my experience as a victim of stalking was very short. And I am so lucky, especially after hearing many other victims' stories, because I got the help when I needed. And I want to see more cases better handled like my case, because at UNT, where I went to school, University of North Texas, they reached out to me before I realized I was being stalked. And so they were able to connect the dots. And like I said, I got the help when I needed it. And I'm just here to advocate for potential victims, current victims, so that we can be more heard out and people can understand the ramifications of what a stalker can turn into. But that's pretty much it. And thank y'all again.
Thank you all so much for giving us that background information. And again, I'm hoping you all get a chance to read the chat, and we'll certainly provide the transcript after, because lots of folks are expressing their deep appreciation for you all providing insight into your situations. So one of the things that we want to start off talking about today, and we all met as a group prior to this webinar, and one of the themes that kept coming up is what these panelists, these ladies, would like to share with you about what they wish people knew about stalking. And by people, we mean responders, the public in general, what they wish that others knew about their situations or the impacts that the stalking has had on them. And so we're going to break that kind of down into roughly 3 categories. Some of the themes that came up for many of you as we were talking were things about the criminal justice response, or perhaps lack of response, depending on your situation, the ongoing, not only short-term, but long-term trauma that you've endured or your family has endured, or your sister, in your case, Peggy, endured, or Debbie endured, and then also talking about the dangerousness of the situation. So let's start with the criminal aspect a little bit. Debbie, I want to start with you. And I know that you shared a little bit in the beginning about the lack of response in Peggy's case. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the frustrations and barriers that Peggy endured as she was trying to seek help?
Absolutely. For Peggy, I think it was like classic textbook stalking, where it started with relentless phone calls, text messages, some death threats, some following. He gave her roses, all of those things. She was deeply disturbed by them. And she finally went to law enforcement with her cell phone records and her cell phone and said, "This guy is harassing me, he's showing up at my work." And the answer always was, "Come back to us when something happens." So Peggy felt like she never ever had any physical proof. She was never harmed. She didn't have any bruises on her. Even when Arson was involved when he burned down Peggy's current boyfriend's back of his house, when he made a flyer with slanderous language on it and spread that over the city of Albuquerque, up to vandalizing my mother's home. All of those things, we still kept going back to law enforcement, and they kept looking at them as like single items, as one-offs, and they never backed up and looked at the complete picture to look at it as a pattern of behavior. And that was her struggle that entire year that she was stalked.
Lenora, I know you've experienced similar frustrations. Do you want to talk a little bit about the situation that you endured as far as response?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, with my situation, what happened was my stalker already had a history of stalking someone else. Bizarrely, my stalker was stalking Ivanka Trump in New York, and it was well publicized, well documented, multiple arrests for that. He had jumped bail. He came to LA with the intention of stalking me. I had just a massive stack of evidence. We're talking thousands of pieces of death threats, rape threats, everything. And when I went to police, even though this person had a documented criminal history, and he also had tried to kill himself in Ivanka Trump's store. So this is somebody who's exhibiting very serious behavior. I'll just be frank, LAPD Northeast Division looked at me and told me to dye my hair and get off the internet, because that was their solution for me. It was to minimize myself and to disappear rather than to actually take some action for what was happening to me. And as all of this was going on, I had to teach myself like how to track the IP from the emails, because he was bouncing around. And that's another thing I want to bring up, is just the technology aspect and the lack of training, and how responders aren't always trained to help us. And so it falls on us to acquire all these skills just to be safe. And so as all this was going on, I'm going to jump many years because there's so much, from the difficulty around the process and delivery of restraining orders, which is another difficult situation too. There was no difficulty for me getting the restraining order, it was serving the individual. But what ultimately happened for me was that my case was at a very elite division at LAPD called the Threat Management Unit, and they don't work on the weekends. So when my stalker wrote me and he said, "I'm going to come kidnap you from LA Comic-Con," which happened to be on a weekend, and I took it back to LAPD, they literally said, "We don't really work on the weekends." And that was an actual response that happened with me. So what I ended up doing was I worked with LA Comic-Con, and we hired security. We dressed them up as Batman and Superman. And when he came to kidnap me, I cannot make this up, Batman and Superman held him down and waited for LAPD to arrive. The story is complete madness. And then just to show the craziness, after that, there were multiple celebrities who then served their restraining order, because there was some incident where I think he tried to kidnap one of their children from school. So very dangerous individual. And yet somehow me, the person who at the time was just working in reality television, had to put this plan together to not get kidnapped. I mean, it's pretty awful.
Thanks for sharing that, Lenora, and I'm sorry that was your experience. Aziza, you alluded to earlier that you had a similar experience and that you turned to social media to leverage some of the response. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I did. I think initially when I started getting stalked, I just knew right off that the police were not taking anything seriously. I think the severity of it all is what I want people to understand about stalking. They didn't the police told me that if he comes back, kill him, use every force necessary. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know anything about that. They told me he hasn't killed you yet, so I doubt he will. And at that point, I'd only been getting stalked for about 1 or 2 months at that point. I'm like, statistically, we know that's not accurate. Like we know that stalking can lead to homicide. And I didn't understand why they didn't know. The amount of mental trauma, I would love for people to really understand, because my friends don't understand, my family, they don't really understand. Like the outside world doesn't understand the psychological effects of getting stalked. My dad was in Vietnam. And when I talk to my dad about these things, my dad is like, "You sound just like me. This sounds like you've been in war." Like it is a war. It is a battle. So I wish that people understood that the mental trauma that you experience from getting stalked, and even the physical trauma, like I don't sleep at night. It's so hard for me to sleep at night. And if I do, I sleep next to my door just so I can make sure that if anybody ever comes in, that I'm able to protect my children. That's really what I want people to understand, that it causes mental and physical effects, that it's something that's serious. It's not a joke. It's not, oh, he was stalking my profile, or it's not a joke. I wish that the police officials and I wish that everybody really could understand the severity of stalking.
Thanks, Aziza. I just want to take a minute because I can see some of the responses in the chat. These are really powerful, heavy stories to hear. So I want to pause for a second to take a collective breath and acknowledge the trauma that and the bravery that you are all showing by sharing your story. Unfortunately, it's not unusual for us to hear some of these particular responses across the country, and several people in the chat are calling out the need for change, and we would agree with that, absolutely. Let's pivot a little bit to Anna and Caitlin, who had different responses from the system. And also, I heard both of you today use the word lucky. Anna, do you want to expand a little bit more about what happened in your situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Lenore and I do have these shockingly similar stories, right? And there's a couple of big differences. I was in a really small community, so rural place. That's probably one of the biggest things I think that held a big difference there. He was also already known for stalking patterns, which I know is similar to Lenora's, but there was just a different response because of that. And there was a really big concern in the small community that this stalker could do something more mass violent or kill myself. And especially because I had this business where we had a gallery walk the first Saturday of every month, they were very concerned as his threats continued, that would be a perfect storm for a larger escalation of a violent crime. And so I think that was a lot of why I got such proactive services. And like I said, being very connected in this small town. Now, there was also a lot of things that still didn't go right. Like I couldn't have law enforcement just at my gallery protecting me. Like I would have somebody there with a concealed carry permit. There was so many of those things I had to do, all the evidence collecting, all of those things that all seem very unfair, yet I know I'm lucky. And I know I'm lucky when you look at the whole story, the different prosecutors that came in, the different cops that I worked with, advocates, if even the judges, if it had been a different judge, we're not here, right? It was just really the luck of the draw with so many of those pieces. And there were still a lot of bumbles along the way, of course. And as being the unluckiest lucky one, I can still say I still deal with so many of those traumatic long-term effects as well of back issues. When the stalker was at his worst, I actually stopped menstruating. And I was 36 years old and I never had my period again. I was forced into extremely early menopause, which is wild to me that just because you don't see a physical wound doesn't mean there isn't that long-term emotional wound that we carry with us for the rest of our lives.
Very well said, Anna. Caitlin, you want to talk a little bit about the response in your situation?
Yeah, so my response to my situation was immediate. The first time I had to make a call to the police, I was living on campus. Anytime I called the police, it was redirected to the UNT police department. And the first report was when he first showed up to my dorm. And so he found out where I lived. He said that he found the dorm room by just walking around, and he said that my name was on the door. How they put those little decor signs up for your freshman year of college. That's, yeah. And my RA was like, we need to make a police report. And so that's why the police were there. And so then at that point, an officer had come in, but he said that a different officer was going to be taking his place. And that was because he had some other information. And the other information was that my ex-boyfriend who was stalking me, he pretty much told me that he was there the day before and pointed towards the fact that he was stalking me. So I didn't realize I was being stalked until he had made the indication, like I arrested him the night before. He was on campus the night before. So at that point, they put in a criminal trespass on UNT or at UNT, which made it to where if he came on campus, if there was even footage of him being on campus, that he would be arrested and charged. And the next day he was served with that notice in person. But ultimately, it was who I had on my case, Officer Polk. And he handled my case in a way that all cases should be handled, because he documented everything that he could. And everything, even the stuff that was on virtually cyber, the tech facilitated stuff, which is hard to document, which is something that sometimes officers don't think that they can document, but everything needs to be documented, because when it comes time to apply for that protective order, they can get that protective order, because we hear all the time, they just keep being pushed aside. They keep being pushed aside. And so the fact that I had an officer doing these things without me having to ask him, he was just doing his job. And I want to see more cases handled in the way that mine was. And this was all back in 2016. And I'm not even sure what kind of training they proposed to the UNT Police Department in a way that allowed them to handle this case so well. Because they even reached out to me because the stalking had continued. They were like, "We think you need a protective order." And my thought wasn't even there yet. And then a week later, it came to that. I don't know. I had just gotten that headspace where I was like, we need this. It's gotten to that point because I just started my freshman year of college and I was trying to be a normal person. And it had gotten to the point where he made it hard. But at the same time, my situation could have been so much worse if I wasn't heard out. I might not be here. That's how I see it. Because once he started being charged with things, he was very angry with me. But yeah, like I said, that we just need to see cases better handled. Law enforcement, they need to start documenting everything.
Caitlin, I appreciate you sharing your situation, and several folks in the chat are expressing appreciation about the college response, keeping in mind that there's lots of different entities that may be charged with responding in these particular situations. Aziza, I want to go back to one of the things that you said earlier, and you started alluding to the impact that the stalking had on you, both in the short term but in the long term. And you mentioned things about how you don't sleep because you're worried about the safety of your boys. So I want to delve a little bit more into those impacts that you all experienced, either during the situation or as the long-term impacts, because I noticed many of you mentioned things like responders saying to you, you weren't physically harmed. And feeling like you have to wait until something like that happens. Aziza, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm going to cry. I already know, but yes, it's taken a number on my mental health. I have PTSD now. I suffer from anxiety. I'm a bubbly person. I'm an outgoing person. I've never suffered from anxiety. And I feel like my whole life is just anxiety of where I'm afraid to leave the house. I'm afraid to get in my car. It's also impacted my children in a way of where my children and I were living with my mother at the time when I started getting stalked, and we lived in a house with a big yard they could play. And we immediately, once I started getting stalked, had to move to an apartment of where my kids, they don't understand. They're still so young. And they ask me every day of like, why can't we be at Gigi's house? Why can't we run? Why can't we play? Like, why don't we have a yard anymore? And I feel like this situation has taken such a pivotal learning years from my children's lives. Ultimately, unfortunately, my kids had to go live with their dad because it wasn't safe. It's not safe here with me. I live alone now. And they miss their mother. I feel like this person took my children's mother away from them. I still see them every week, but it's just not the same. And it's not fair. It's caused me so much physical stress, just like where it's like my hair started falling out. And it's a lot. It's very serious. It's very serious. And I think that people don't understand those effects. They don't understand. And I still consider myself to be strong, but I'm that girl. I'm still strong. But I feel so small a lot of days. And I think that's okay, but it's been a toll on my family, especially because when he started stalking me, he started stalking my family too. Like he started stalking my mother, my sister, my brother, my dad, my ex-husband, anybody that was associated with me got stalked with me. And so it's caused them so much trauma as well. So this one person has a whole huge web of trauma around them. And I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me. It's not fair to my family. It's not fair to anybody that's here. It's not fair that this continues. So, sorry, I'm a crier.
You don't need to apologize. And there's a lot of people giving you some really great support and echoing what we're all thinking, that all of you are immensely strong. And so sending that across the chat. And I hope you see all the heart bubbles that are floating up as well. So take a second to acknowledge all of that. Debbie,
Thank
I
you.
noticed you nodding your head a lot when Aziza was talking about the impact not only on her, but on her family. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the impacts that you saw, not only on Peggy, but how it affected you as a family?
Oh, good Lord, Aziza, everything that you are saying mirrored Peggy, because Peggy, she was a hot sister in the family. Let me just put it that way. Blonde, blue eyes, beautiful, athletic, yoga instructor, foodie, health conscious. But I will tell you this, I watched that girl's being just absolutely disintegrate in front of my eyes. She lost weight. She became hypervigilant. She wasn't comfortable around our family. She had 3 young nieces at the time. She wasn't comfortable being around them because we thought maybe someday Patrick would just come along and shoot our entire family. Was he going to shoot my mom when Peggy wasn't around? There was a point, it was in December of 2002, so about a month before Peggy was killed. She had moved out of Albuquerque and gone to live in hiding out in Turlock, California. And we got a call from Patrick's sister around Christmas time saying, "We can't find Patrick. You might want to call your local police department. I don't know if he's in the area or not." And that put our entire family on edge. I wasn't living at home at the time, but living in Cleveland with my family in Youngstown, I was worried about suspicious cars on my street. I kept an eye on my girls. Like I said, I always thought maybe someday he would pull up in front of my house and grab my 2 girls and throw them in the car and drive away with them. So stalking not only affects the victim, but it's got this ripple effect where it affects their entire support system. So it did branch out to our family, to Peggy's friends. He was harassing and stalking Peggy's current boyfriend. So Aziza, I feel you, because what you're talking about is what I saw happen to my sister before she was killed.
Lenore, I noticed you nodding your head a lot as Debbie and both Aziza were talking. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they're both bringing up the physical repercussions, because Anna and I are friends and we'll text each other. It's like, oh, my stomach, my this, my that. We all have these huge things. And then another thing about these predators is they want to infiltrate and obtain and possess and just really just every aspect of your life. And even Anna and I both gave up our careers, our galleries, our livelihood. And you imagine how completely that messes you up. And then for me specifically, after I gave up my gallery, which is something I worked my whole life to achieve, it's so hard, if anyone knows anything about the art world, to make a living off that and to just completely have to be like, I guess I don't do that anymore. Imagine all of you, your job, you just don't do that anymore. Reinvent yourself. So I started working in reality TV, and my stalker started sending my boss death threats. And everybody, because they knew that my stalker tried to kill himself in Ivanka's store, were so scared of workplace violence. And so when you work freelance, they just don't renew you. And I lost my job yet again. And then what ultimately ended up happening to me, this is a chain of events that can happen, was I had gone public with my story because I had no choice. And so I finally got another job working in television, and I had to disclose to my new boss, I'm being stalked, my story's out there, you may Google this, whatever. And I didn't realize that he was a predator as well. And he ended up ultimately sexually harassing me because he knew I really needed that job. So we don't even realize how the chain of events, how it impacts. We're all nodding. It's one bad thing to another bad thing. And you're just like, how do I get out of this cycle? And it's just, so yeah, so this is the fact that we all nod and it's all resonating because we're all sharing this similar collective experience of how it just creeps in. And then I saw people were asking about your families. That's a whole other conversation. You have people who are well-intentioned loved ones, but they don't know how to show up. They want to. If you're so lucky and if you have someone like Debbie that's there, some of us don't have that. And then for me, my sister, she so desperately wants to show up for me, doesn't know how, gets nervous, and then just is avoidant and doesn't talk to me. And it's just, it just unravels every part of your life. I can't tell you when I was single how many men would not date me. That wasn't a thing. They were all nodding. I don't want to take up all the time, but yeah, there's just a lot of shared awful experiences that go beyond what you may anticipate into every area of your life.
And I know I've had the pleasure of reading some of those similar experiences that you wrote about in your book. So I'm curious if you'd like to share a little bit about your thoughts.
Yeah, I always joke around about the dating thing. It's a very true thing. I've certainly had relationships end because of this. And even now, I've just started seeing somebody. And before I would even consider pursuing a relationship, I said to him, look, I'm safe right now, but in a couple of years, I'm not going to be. So if that's not something you could even consider when getting to know me, then I don't have time for this, because I don't need to start going down the road of a relationship and have you be like, oh no, I can't touch this. But one of the things I thought of when you brought up family was my family's been, I think, as supportive as they can be without really understanding it all. But I think one of the things that's been really interesting is that my stalker writes a lot of letters, and he sends them to my prosecutors, and he sends them to former judges, and he sends them to people in my old community, and he sends them to the police station, and he makes threats to all these people, and it's his way of contacting me because I have a lifetime protection order. And the thing that always really stands out to me is all these people who are in this session today is when you are also putting yourself in possible harm's way by even serving us and trying to protect us. Like, my prosecutor has a huge file of letters from the stalker, and he gets them all the time. And he has 3 little kids, and his wife's a teacher. And that's really, it's that extra thing that I think about and just, oh my gosh, thank you for the work that everyone on this call is doing to protect us, even when it might mean putting yourself in harm's way.
You all have talked a lot about the emotional impact, and then you've also brought up a little bit about the impacts on work and finances. Are there other things that you want to share about the impact of your situations? I'll open this up to any of you.
I mean, it's definitely made us like hyper vigilant, but I think we've all kind of hit on that just because I don't know, we're on alert. And for me, when I was in college, I became the mom of my friend group because I did not want any of them going home with a stranger. Because in my case, Jackie Vandergriff, a TWU student in the same college town that I lived in, she went home with my stalker and he killed her. But she had no idea what he was capable of. And so I know you never expect that to happen at a one-night stand, but in my eyes, it happened. And I don't ever want to see that happen to any of my friends. I just want to see things done and handled better. Because there's too many people, too many of my friends that have dealt with situations, and I'm just tired of hearing about more cases, especially on college campuses too. But that's another.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah.
For me, I'll just say, the way I look at the world now is everyone's a suspect. I think very differently now about things that used to be very casual. Peggy was in hiding. Her address was undisclosed, but she was found when Patrick encountered a UPS driver. And he had asked if he had a picture with Peggy with him and asked the UPS driver if he knew this girl, that he was a private investigator. He just needed to get some money from her, very like casual, nonchalant. And even though the UPS driver was not permitted to give that information to Patrick, at the end of the day, he caved. And I really think now somebody were to drive down my street and be like, hey, do you know where Gwen lives? I'm super cautious about something that seems so benign right now, because that poor man, he's got a big burden that he has to carry for the rest of his life by doing something like that. But I will say, yes, I do carry a little bit of hypervigilance with me. My sister's stalker is dead. He killed himself at the scene of the crime. However, his family is still alive. I don't know if someday they'll come after me for speaking out about this, but I still have my guard up.
So many of you nodding your heads. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I struggle a lot with the loss of identity of who I was before. Even if you notice on the intro, the first thing I said was, I'm a multi-violent crime survivor, as if that now defines me. And in a way it does. And not our accomplishments, who we are, the things that we love. And it just becomes so much of your universe. So just finding yourself in all of this is a real struggle for a lot of us.
Anna?
Yeah, I think it's also, I would 100% agree with Lenora. Like when he first started stalking me, when it first became known to me, I was creating a window display at my gallery. And it's over 10 years later, and I'm doing a window display for a friend's gallery for the first time right now, which is very like full circle for me and beautiful, but it's taken me 10 years. And that's a long time. And even that, being on display in a window, creating this display is bringing back all of those emotions, right? And it's those things that we forever carry. Like the lighting at my grocery store, at one of my grocery stores in Vermont, is the same lighting as a grocery store that he used to stalk me out in Washington. And so now, even though he is behind bars, I still struggle to grocery shop at that store calmly because of the lighting. And those are the things that I think are so deeply entrenched in us that we're always navigating, that anxiety that's always perking up in us and bubbling up, and we're trying to pass down so that we can just function.
That was very well said, Anna.
Yeah, I wanted to say, just like with Lenora, just my identity, like it's caused so much issue with people that I've encountered that don't know my story. So there's a lot of people that were there when I started getting stalked. There's a lot of people that weren't there and they don't understand. And they're like, why can't you stop talking about this? Why is this still a thing for you? And I'm just like, because it's always going to be a thing for me. And I don't know how to express or explain that. So that's been a big issue for me. I think I have the other end of dating of where I feel like I attract predators now. Like I attract people that hear my story and they're like, oh, okay, like you've accepted this before, you'll accept this again. And I feel dating has been hard for me because I'm just so cautious of, oh wow, like you mirror this person. And even with my stalker. So with my stalker, when I first met my stalker, I actually, like, somebody I was dating was murdered before I met him. And when I opened up to him about it, and I was like, I lost somebody right before this, and he connected with me. He reminded me of of the guy that I lost, and so we connected off that. So I met that predator off of that situation, and then continuously, I feel like I meet predators. But identity is a big thing. I was working in property management when I started getting stalked, and I was working at my job for 2 years, and I ended up losing my job. I ended up getting fired, and I feel like it's been a ripple effect of where now, trying to find a job, I can't find a job because I had to go public, and I don't regret it. I had to do it for the safety of my family. But now people look at that, and the employers look at that, and they're like, I'm not going to hire this person. You're a liability. Why would I hire you when you have this stalker that is, sending my coworkers pictures of guns, threatening and harassing them? Like, why would I hire you? And so it's been a constant battle. So it doesn't just affect that. It's my identity, it's my employment, it's my finances, but also affects my kids. I can't fully support my kids the way that I need to because of this one individual person that's not sane and not healthy and not whole. Like, it shouldn't be that this one person can affect so many aspects of my life. It just doesn't seem fair.
Any other thoughts from anyone before we move on? One of the things that we had talked about when we were planning for this webinar, and one of the things I've heard many of you mention, is the frustration about what we refer to as the normalization of the word stalking, where you get very frustrated when you hear people say, oh, I was stalking your Facebook, or I was stalking your Instagram. Talk a little bit about, and you've alluded to it a little bit, about your change in perspective when people use that word, or when that word is thrown around lightly to describe behavior.
Who, me?
You can go, Aziza, or anyone else.
Okay.
Totally up to you guys.
It eats me up so bad. Do you know how, like, it's so frustrating. And I get it. It comes from a lack of understanding. Like, people just don't understand what stalking is. It is very triggering to me. I'll have people, and I cringe every single time I'm talking to someone and they're like, yeah, he was stalking my profile, or oh, you're a stalker, as a joke, as if it's, and I know logically they don't understand what it is. But it's so frustrating to me because I'm like, do you have PTSD? Are you financially struggling, mentally, emotionally struggling? And it's valid. If you feel like you're being stalked, then definitely get resources and seek out help, however. But like, it's just so normalized, and I don't think that it should be like a term that is normalized. I think that if more people understood the severity of it and they understood what it really is, then they wouldn't use it so casually. I think that I think it comes from a lack of understanding. I think that people need to be educated more on what stalking is.
And to pivot into that last category that we have listed on this particular slide, and you could let us there, Aziza, you said exactly, I wish people understood how dangerous this was. And I know for you, Debbie, you lost Peggy. Caitlin, your situation was a little bit different, but also resulted in the end of life. And many of you have expressed the frustration about how dangerous these situations were and perhaps the lack of consequences. I'm curious, Caitlin, if you want to start, as a result of sharing with others about what has happened in your situation, what do you find people's reactions are? Do you think people made the connection that this was a stalking situation?
In relation to the murder?
Yes.
In relation to the murder, from the court case, they didn't really take the stalking into account, which I think that they should have. But that was because the second I walked out of that courtroom, I started crying, and they won't take an emotional witness. Or I wasn't even prepared to be in the same room as him that same day. So whenever I left the room, yeah, I'm going to cry my eyeballs out whenever I saw my mom and then Officer Polk, the one that handled my case. But Officer Polk ended up speaking on my behalf to tell them what all the charges that led up to the murder, because he wouldn't have been in that same town if he hadn't been stalking me. And granted, I'm very lucky that they connected the dots even before I did. But if they didn't, I might not be here, because that's the kind of behavior that my stalker I still don't know why he did what he did. And I guess that's quite traumatic for me, and he still thinks he's innocent, but that's another thing. But ultimately, they just had a hard time relating the murder with the stalking case, which is why he was only charged with capital murder, but he was allowed to, what's the word for it, where he can get parole. In my eyes, they should have made it to where he was ineligible for parole, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it. But I'll worry about that in a few years. And also, whenever he was charged for stalking, 3 days later, that's whenever he went on to murder Jackie. If they hadn't allowed him bail for the stalking charge, this whole situation just might not have happened. It could have been prevented, because on paper, there were so many charges. They should have been able to see, like, this is really progressing. We should probably do something about this. Oh, no, we'll just keep letting him bail out. And that's why I think people need to know the severity of a stalker, because Yeah, I'm not the victim of stalking that died, but my stalker went off to kill someone. And I'm glad that I'm able to be an advocate for those victims of stalking that were murdered, but I'm just trying to do my part.
We're all thankful for all of you and your participation today. So this is delving into a little bit of a pivot, but also building upon what you all have talked about. I'm curious what you found was helpful in your situations. So even if you didn't get the great response that you were hoping for from the system, were there things that people said or did for you that, or continue to do for you, that help support you? And Anna, I see you vigorously nodding your head, so I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was like from the first time I stepped foot in law enforcement and even made a call to somebody who was connected to law enforcement before, I was believed. And I am on the board of AVAWI and Violence Against Women International that has the Start by Believing campaign. And I think that to me is so big. When we look at stalking that is minimized over and over again, to be believed, it really helps you start to be able to go the distance and learn. And that was a big thing for me too, was I'm a question asker. And so I asked for education. I was like, talk to me about this. I want to know everything. And I would do research and just trying to understand what was happening to me. And so that was a big thing, was really, and when we went to final trial in 2019, my prosecutor, James Kennedy, I felt like for the first time, I wasn't just being looked at as a victim. I was part of my own team. And it was because, yes, we were focusing on this crime, but he also just got to know me as a person. And that was a huge thing, to be able to continue that distance and to go through all of these years to that point. I think getting to know who we are is a really big thing for us being able to go the distance, if we're even willing to take the report from us.
How about the rest of you? Anyone else have insight into what was helpful?
I have a sort of a weird answer, which is it wasn't helpful for me, but again, you try to be for other people what you didn't have. I now have a PI company, which again is unfortunately not accessible to all, but if somebody is able to, again, I know that Debbie, you don't love the idea of a PI, but one thing that we're able to do is provide things like tech experts, which is something that law enforcement frequently doesn't have the training to do. So we're able to get a lot of stuff done that way. We can do security assessments of the home. I'm just now interested in exploring all kind of alternative things. Also, I work with like forensic psychologists who are able to do evaluations for risk assessment, which is something that a lot of times law enforcement doesn't have the training to do either. I think it's also just being open to all the different other ways that we can help people that maybe aren't frequently utilized. If that makes sense.
Else? Caitlin, I know you shared earlier that you found it incredibly helpful that in your case, someone else took the burden of providing some of that documentation. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and what in particular was helpful?
Everything was helpful. They just took it off my hands. Officer Polk, it got to the point where he was just like, just email me the screenshots. And so every time I got something new, it was documented. And there wasn't really, the only person that got in my way was whenever I had transferred to the Buffalo Wild Wings in Denton. And I had a manager, and he told me, since we didn't yet had the protective order, that if he showed up again at my workplace, that there was nothing he could do unless he physically harassed me or if I had a restraining order. And so I went to the bathroom and I started just crying my eyes out, and I texted my old manager and pretty much begged for my job back, but I had to commute to a different location. And because I knew I couldn't work in a place where I wasn't safe. But that instance was, like I said, the only obstacle that got in my way. Most victims have a hard time getting a protective order. There's funds, I guess if you have to pay maybe a lawyer. I really don't know, because I didn't have to go through that. There were no hoops. They just sent me to someone and took care of it. And that's the approach that my university took. They literally said that we're a Title IX school. We are legally obligated to ensure our students' protection and their safety. But they actually applied it. They actually did it. And so we just need to see more colleges and agencies just taking this more seriously.
Debbie, I saw you nod. I know that Peggy's experience was not like that, and that she had lots of documentation and didn't necessarily get that response. And I'm curious, because I know you do a lot of speaking on college campuses, if you've seen that change with college campuses, and are the things changing happened in Caitlin's situation?
You know what I see a lot on college campuses, and this is partially why I'm so grateful that I'm able to go out and tell Peggy's story, as a lot of students are not connecting the dots and are not recognizing behavior as stalking. When you don't recognize it, you can't define it, you're not going to go forward and report it. Telling Peggy's story and talking about her case and sharing information about stalking is sometimes an eye-opener for these students who, because of shows like you and romanticizing and glamorizing stalking, they're not making the connections. So it seems like once they realize what's happening to them, that they are reaching out to either confidential sources in the community or reaching out to someone on campus. And some of the schools that I've been to have fantastic resources, programming, a lot of great things for students. So definitely on college campuses, I do see some good things happening.
I've also heard you, especially you, Anna, talk about the difference it made to have the people that were working with you give you back some of your autonomy. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Some of the choices that they offered you, that I've heard you refer to it as simple choices, but it made the world of difference to me. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to echo Debbie as somebody who speaks. I do a lot of work with military as well before I speak about my autonomy. But with the military, it's been really interesting to have military units. I've had major officers, high-level officers in the military that I'm speaking to connect the dots that they're being stalked. And so you have everything from college kids to older men who are like, oh, that's what that is. And I think that's so much of why we do this talking, is so that we can have that education. But with my autonomy, it really was the simple little things. My advocate here in Vermont, the first time I met with her, we sat down and she pointed at my stalker's name on a piece, like on the all the court filings, and she said, "What do you want me to call him?" And nobody had ever asked me that before. And it was the simplest thing, but it gave me a choice when I was in this place where I felt like I had no choices, no options. I know all of you who work with victims, we can be real persistent in emailing and calling and all of those things. And my victim witness coordinator was like, "How would you like me to communicate with you?" And I was like, "I'd like a phone call after the hearings, because I'm in Vermont, the hearings are taking place in Washington. And then I'd like you to email me what we talked about." And there were basically 2 years between when they started building this case and we went to trial. And my prosecutors, "I'm going to email you every single month so that you haven't been forgotten." And those things, one, means I wasn't bombarding them all the time, and also gave me peace of mind and empowered me to keep going the distance. So oftentimes it's the littlest things that make the biggest difference, that give us a choice. And I really feel like when you give us a choice, you're starting to give us back our voice.
That's really well put, Anna.
I just want to say that I'm very encouraged by everyone's stories. I would also like to say it does hurt a little bit. And I want this to be like where we are. And for Anna's story, for Caitlin's story, I want that to be where we are. I didn't get an ounce, like any of that, of where it's just really hard to get follow-up calls or just get anyone to really care. I will say that the only thing that I like really would say went right was what went right in my case was after I got public support. So after I called Baltimore City out, I called the police out, and I started really advocating for myself. My post on Twitter was literally, "If I die, I want everyone to know it was him," because I fully was prepared to die. It wasn't until after that that I started receiving a certain level of treatment that I feel like every victim should receive upfront, urgency, of where I had the police calling me on Instagram The FBI started FaceTime messaging me on Twitter. The mayor of Baltimore reached out to me and he got an extradite approved in my case because I had different jurisdictions in my case. And that was like a difficult moving part with it. The Baltimore police sent police cars to monitor my mom's house. Like those are the things that did go right, but it took too long for it to go right. Like that gap, that like 4-month gap could have been life or death for me. And it wasn't like I had to start a GoFundMe and get people to help me like relocate. And if I didn't do that, I don't know what would have happened to me in that meantime. You got this person that's saying, I'm going to slit your throat in front of your children. They're going to walk over your dead body. Which child do you want to see die first? I'm putting a bullet in your head. I'm throwing acid in your face every single day. It was life or death for me, that time frame. So what went right was after it already went wrong for me.
Lenora, I see you nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback two things that people may not like think about with these cases. A lot of these jurisdictions where stalking is considered a wobbler, right? It could be a misdemeanor or a felony. So we're left in this holding pattern because they don't want to, they're like, oh, they really minimize the misdemeanor. Why bother? And so you're just sitting there going, are you kidding me? While you're waiting to stack up charges. And the unfortunate thing is, eventually you'll have that vandalism. They'll do the thing, but they just leave you there hanging. So for providers, just having that communication, what is the status of my case? Because we're already so freaked out and we also don't want to ruin our relationships. It's this weird situation where you're like, I need to work with these people, but I also got to call them out. And I'll just be frank, I call people out in the media and there was some retaliation from some providers because of that. So it's this difficult balance where you want to hold people accountable, but you also don't want to be considered a nightmare person, right? So you have that. And then Aziza also brought up the jurisdictional issue. My FBI was also on my case as well. And it's really common that jurisdictions don't even communicate with each other. So you've got all these sort of things that are right. We're nodding. So there's just so many barriers to justice. And that's why when we do have a win, it's so incredible and it should be celebrated, but it should be the norm. But yeah, I just had to bring up the wobbler of it all because that really is an issue. And I have, unfortunately, where I am in Los Angeles, we get told, we won't even bother filing at this point. Let's just wait. Like we have no say in that. So it's incredibly frustrating and painful.
I also have to say one more thing. Funny enough, so Lenora and I actually knew each other before I started getting stalked. And because of her work, I just wanted to thank you, Lenora, but because of her work, I was able to have that resource as well. So when I started getting stalked, the first person I was like, I need to talk to Lenora. Like, I know Lenora is going to help me and tell me how to navigate this. And she did. She was like, this is what's going to happen. This is going to happen in the coming months. Like, you need to talk to this person, talk to that person. And she was a resource for me. So we need more people like Lenora.
So this is the opportunity for all of you. And because people are asking in the chat, what's your ask of the folks that are participating today? What would you like to see them do differently? What would you like to see changed? Lots of talk in the chat about changing laws, etc. But for the people who are doing their every single day job, either in advocacy or the criminal justice system, what's your ask of them? And Anna, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I tend to try and highlight the best practices that have happened in my case, but it took us 10 years, right? 2 years I didn't know he was stalking me, but it took us 8 years of doing this work to get that conviction. And that's a really long time to be building this. And there was a lot of things that went wrong here in Vermont and other places. And so while I come out and do this because I am the exception, right? I'm one of the few who have gotten this positive sentence. It took so much to get there. And I want this to be the standard. I want those best practices that I've shared with you to be used so that people like Aziza and Peggy and Caitlin and Lenora are also getting the results that should have been there. So that's my ask, is to keep talking about these things, keep calling out somebody when they use the word stalking inappropriately. Just that simple thing, even just posting about Stalking Awareness Month on your social media. You have no idea the possible victim that might see that and reach out to you. So I think just continuing to keep this conversation and elevating it is so important to me.
Thanks, Anna. Caitlin, what comes to mind for you? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. So my thing has always been to keep your eyes open, and the fact that I always like to say that people need people, because in my case, when everything went down, when things started to go wrong, I had a village, and it felt like I was never alone. There were moments I was alone, but just be there for your people. And if your friend's been acting weird or something like that, just ask them questions and just be on the lookout. Do what you can.
Lenora?
Sure. Yeah, we live in this really weird culture where we tell everybody, like, be an influencer, put yourself out there, and we don't tell them how to actually protect themselves. So I think just, again, just some common sense best practices, stuff like how to wipe your address off the internet, learning these things and then teaching it to our loved ones and our peers is really helpful, because so much of it is preventative. Obviously, not everything, right? These things are still going to happen, but there is a lot that we can do. So it's just learning that stuff, getting that information, and then passing it on. And also, I'll just name it, I'm going to address the men. If we could also have some men stepping up more, because I keep seeing these amazing women doing that. And I feel like if we could just have, obviously, the offenders are everybody, just like the victims are everybody. But I just personally would like to see men educating other men. And that's something that I just see a real lack of.
Thanks, Lenora. Aziza?
So I think everybody really touched on everything I was going to say, honestly. I just think that just educating yourself on what stalking really is, naming it, knowing it, and being mindful of it, whether it's behaviors that are being done to you or what you're doing to other people. I think that's like really important. I think that providing support and believing victims and believing women when they say they're being stalked. All people get stalked, like Lenore said, but I think just believing, being supportive, and providing resources, any resource that you can. I think that I was just extremely blessed that once I did get public support, that people were reaching out to me and offering a home, offering a bed to me, offering those resources financially and helping me out. So just being understanding of the situation, whether it's financially, mentally supportive, I think that's really important.
Thanks, Aziza. Debbie, how about you?
For me, it is listen to what the victim is saying and believe them. A lot of times it is trauma that's talking. I think back to Peggy's case for a full year. She was dismissed by law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, her attorney, his attorney, fire. I'm trying to think, coworkers, law enforcement in other jurisdictions. There was not one person that Peggy reached out to that believed what she was going through was as terrifying as what she was going through. So please listen to those victims, read between the lines sometimes. Like I said, oftentimes it's trauma that's talking. So I'm just asking y'all really listen to what those victims are saying.
And to that end, I have been asked as well. Thanks to Debbie's tireless efforts after Peggy's death, Stalking Awareness Month was founded and started. And this year we are doing the first ever National Day of Action Against Stalking. And so it will be held on January 18th, which is the day that Debbie's family lost Peggy. And in honor of Peggy, one of the things that Debbie often says, and you heard her allude to it today, is as they watched Peggy endure Patrick's stalking, that they saw Peggy's sparkling personality just disappear. And so on behalf of Peggy and Lenora and Aziza and Caitlin and Anna, SPARC is asking you to help bring back the sparkle. And so on January 18th, we are asking you to participate in the Day of Action that Emma from our office has linked in the chat, and post a social media post We have also provided you with things that you can do throughout the month of January. And we're so incredibly grateful to the amazing women on this panel who helped us kick off the month and helped us shine a light on this issue and give you some insight into what they've endured. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone on this webinar in expressing our extreme gratitude for your bravery and your perseverance. I have never met a more fierce group of individuals in my entire life, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to work with all of you. So please check out SPARC's information and our website for additional things to do during the month of January. We will also be posting a recording of this webinar on the website as soon as we receive the transcript and the translation back. So that's usually about 2 weeks after this particular webinar, and we'll be posting it in our archives. Any last words that any of you would like to offer beyond what you already said today? Lenora, anything else you want to share? I just put you on the spot, sorry.
No, it's just, again, it's just so meaningful to have these conversations, to not feel alone, because when you're being stalked, it's such an isolating experience. And even just to have this community and to know that people care is just so meaningful. So there's so much, I just had to close with that because this is one of the roughest things I've ever had to go through, and it's ongoing. Oh yeah, I will say one weird thing. I always say, people always say to me, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And I'm like, it's not past tense, it is happening to me. It is stalking. If I could just, one little bit is that stalking is a really weird crime. And whereas and again, I'm a multi-crime survivor. So with my other crimes, the trauma happened and the healing could begin. With stalking, it is just this open, never ending wound, and you never get that relief. So I just pass that on to people, just what that means, the never ending quality to it. And I'm going to let everybody else speak because I know they have a lot to say, but I just had to say that while I had the chance.
Thank you. And it's an excellent point, Lenora. Thank you for bringing that up. Aziza, any final words?
Just everything that Lenora said, that hit heavy of where people do say, this happened to you, past tense, and it's always going to happen. I just want to say that I'm just extremely grateful that I'm like, oh my God, why am I the crier of the group? I hate this for me. I'm just extremely grateful to be seen and be heard, especially when I felt like just completely isolated, completely silenced for so long. And I was just screaming to no one. And so I am just like, I feel extremely blessed and honored that like people are actually like hearing me, hearing my story, and other people's story can be heard too. So thank you.
Caitlin?
No, but thank you all so much just for hearing us out, and let's know it, name and stop it.
Anna?
Yeah, I think I definitely echo Lenora's as well, of just, this isn't something where people can congratulate me that this is over. And this work that all of us are doing is incredibly difficult. I don't think any of us wanted to go out and speak about stalking as part of our life or career or anything, but we do this so that we can keep saving lives. That's the biggest thing. So please join us in that. And just, I once again just have to thank Debbie for everything you've done over these last 20 years. You're just absolutely a hero to all of us.
Debbie, anything you'd like to offer?
And I'm just sitting here thinking, 21 years ago, just shy of 21 years ago, like I said, I knew I wanted to do something and I never knew what that something was, but this something that has happened is absolutely amazing. And it is a struggle. It's an uphill climb. We still have a lot of work to do. But the beautiful thing about this is to see Peggy's legacy live on in such a fabulous and powerful ways. I thank the women that I sit on this panel with today, and I thank all of you for attending and for the hard work that you do, because it's not easy.
I can't say it any better than that. So thank you all so much for participating, and thank you all for listening today. We appreciate your time and energy, and again, much gratitude for our panelists.